For our final entrepreneurship panel, we're discussing how to fund your business and avoid some common pitfalls. Dr. Kevin Cox is from Florida Atlantic University, a network partner for our entrepreneurship program. Cesar Ruiz is the CEO of Learning Alliance Corporation, offering businesses workforce training and development programs and grant management services. Marcia Schuffman, University of West Florida, and Dr. Kawanui from Florida Gulf Coast University, both network partners and business experts.
I'm Amy Enteris, and I'm the Entrepreneurship Program Manager for Veterans Florida, and I welcome you to the Funding Entrepreneurship panel. And I'd like to also say that we appreciate the participation by Bank of America. They are our sponsor for this virtual expo. So thank you to them. And if you would go ahead and go around in the room, so to speak, and introduce yourselves and just say your name and your organization and just give us a brief background, your brief background. And Dr. Cox, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kevin Cox at Florida Atlantic University. I work for the Adams Center for Entrepreneurship and now at our new venture accelerator.
Thank you. Marcia, we'll go with you next.
Thanks, Amy. My name is Marcia Schuffman. I'm with the Military and Veterans Resource Center at the University of West Florida in Pensacola, Florida. And this is the coffee cup. My background is I've been involved with membership in this program since before its beginning. I started with the program officially in March. My background, I have an MBA. I'm a certified Kaufman facilitator, so I'm familiar with Lean Startup, Business Model Canvas, and a lot of proven methodologies to help entrepreneurs create businesses efficiently.
Wonderful, thank you. Cesar, we'll go with you next, please.
Sure.
Very well. Okay.
This is Cesar Ruiz. I'm the president and CEO of Learning Alliance Corporation out of Tampa, Florida. Been blessed to have really started this organization back in 2002. And we have supported roughly around 3,000 veterans over the past 3 years. We have an average run rate of about 5,000 to 7,000 students a year. With a large portion of them being veterans and really helping organizations develop and grow by taking full advantage of our hidden workforce in veterans, I personally am a serial entrepreneur. I own 7 different companies and have been blessed to have learned some interesting lessons in the startup, selling, funding, and the VC process of generating. That's basically my background.
Thank you. Dr. K?
Yes, Sandra Kawanui, Dr. Kawanui, commonly known as Dr. K by most people. I am director of the School of Entrepreneurship at Florida Gulf Coast University. We started a School of Entrepreneurship several years ago, and we're currently in the process of building a building and a very large incubator on the first floor of our building. And we are started with the Veterans Program right from the beginning, and as well as several of other of you that have done that. We've helped to develop the curriculum for the Veterans Program. Before starting as an academic, I had 22 years in business. I was a financial investment advisor for entrepreneurs. I also built my business and had 40-some employees and built a 12,000 square foot building and started my business and sold it after 20-some years.
Wow, that's amazing.
As an academic.
Congratulations.
That's a great.
Yes,
great story.
exactly. Constantly building. Cesar, what was that?
Oh, no, I think that's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Thank you,
it's
Dr.
fun.
Yes.
It's fun to give back to and watch both our veterans and our students and watching them become entrepreneurs and
Yeah,
being able to be an entrepreneur in a university is an interesting dynamic,
yes.
as we all have experienced. So
Thank you for sharing.
Exactly. Yes, I agree.
But it can be done.
Wonderful. Thank you.
yeah, so naming
Well-
of the building is occurring next week, and we're just moving on. So.
Good.
And our veterans have been great. We've thoroughly enjoyed them and watched them grow and do a great job. And this program has been wonderful for us, for all of our veterans.
Thank you. That's wonderful to hear. And our veterans and participants, service members, transitioning service members, all will gain a lot of insight and inspiration from all of you panelists. So thank you very much for joining us today. So we'll just go ahead and get started with the questions. So a lot of our participants are trying to get started on a shoestring budget when they are starting out as entrepreneurs. So if we could just go ahead and discuss what your ideas on how you get started with a business on a shoestring budget. So we'll just go ahead in the same order. Dr. Cox, you can go ahead and begin.
Wow. So not an easy question to answer, right? Everything costs money. It can be tough to start, but bootstrapping is certainly especially early on. What I'd say is probably the most important component of that would be your customers, really focusing on your customers and developing and providing a product or service that is indeed of value to your specific customers. A lot of times I have a tendency to end up working with entrepreneurs, not so much the veterans group, but elsewhere that may have a tendency to build, right? They want to build stuff. They want to make stuff. They want to invent stuff. They want to innovate. And that is awesome. Very cool, very exciting. And fun, you know, they love their labs, their garages, their inventors, their thinkers, but you've really got to have that contact with customers to ensure you're building something that they genuinely want. And if you are, ideally at a pretty early stage, you can start funding your business with some revenue, right? If you can provide a service or a product that you can then in turn exchange for, you know, money, then you can start funding out of some of your revenue, some of your earliest expenses. In addition to that, there are lots of free resources around, whether it's, you know, software, educational tools, information. You know, so much information is free. Of course, a lot of it's bad. So you've got to be cautious. And that's why I endorse programs like this one and anything else that has a long established history and reputation where you can go and you can learn and you can leverage those resources, not to mention your local resources, really anything you can get your hands on. Be creative, you know. Other things I see in terms of bootstrapping, sometimes you may have a side business or maybe it's your core job. You know, if you do have a job, you probably don't want to leave and take the leap until you're absolutely sure and you absolutely have to, you know, things like that, to fund a side project or a business until you're pretty sure, or at least you have some confidence. There's always some leap of faith you have to take at some point. But the longer you can kind of string that out, gather information, get feedback, build confidence, and fund it however you can with other, you know, be it odd jobs or a skill you possess or consultancy, anything you can really do, I think benefits entrepreneurs who are trying to bootstrap.
Thank you very much for that. That's great information. So appreciate that. Ms. Sheffman, we'll go to you next for that question. Marcia?
I'm an evangelist I'm an evangelist for validation. And frequently we get students who come in and say, I've got this great idea and I've got 10 people who are on my advisory board and I've got 2 other people who want to help me and I have to employ them. And first of all, you haven't validated your product. You don't have a customer. You have to identify who your customer is. And then you partner with your customer and you create a solution. And that's one way to help with what Dr. Cox just said, is bootstrapping. Bootstrapping doesn't mean that you need to cover the entire cost yourself, but it means that whatever cost that you are experiencing, it's a validation, it's been validated before you move on to the next step. I think that is the biggest mistake that I'm seeing students make when they come into the program, is thinking that they must pay, you know, 6 figures to start a business. And it, for, I would say 85% of the businesses that we have coming in to our program, it simply is not true. You need to validate, validate, validate. As Dr. Cox also said, you need to have a side gig. Maybe this is the side gig and you stay with your day job. But you need to understand who your customer is. You need to verify that the product is something they need. And this is the time when you're supposed to be spending a small amount of money creating and proving what that product is. I'm not in favor of spending a lot of money, like I said, for 85% of the companies or products or services that are out there until you know who is going to be using it and that there actually is a need for it. We recently had someone come in and they started a nonprofit, which also was a mistake. They should have been a for-profit company. And she felt that she needed to have people on her board, almost an advisory group, but she would be paying them. And I said, no, they're not the ones who are going to be going in, doing this service and cleaning up, going home, interacting with the people who are going to be paying for this. And she finally realized who her customers were. And the customers were not going to be needing to see 12 people at one time. They were only going to be needing to see her to experience what she had to offer. So.
Interesting. Yeah. That's interesting insight. Thank you. Mr. Russ, would you please continue with answering that question?
Or, I mean, before assuming that, you know, some basic assumptions, obviously, I do hope that everyone that does start a business has done their due diligence of identifying the true budget of who they are, what they're supposed to be, that they've done the market research to identify the market cap, who the competition is, the price points, all those pieces of data. Assuming that that's all been done and there is a good understanding of, you know, who's going to be generating the revenue, who's going to be sitting in which seat of the bus. I also think that you don't really need capital to start a company. There's a great book out there called Slicing Pie. I highly recommend that anyone that's an entrepreneur, that they read it, because you can literally build a grunt fund to basically identify resources that are out there in society, people that have a vested value. You can provide a perceived value to equity and have it where there is an equity fund that's readily available for those that earn it. And the operative word is earning, because you first need to identify, are you a visionary? Are you an integrator? What seat in the bus do you fill? Because a bus has to be full. There has to be a certain level of executors in there. And, you know, unfortunately, instead of assuming what the market needs, it's really good to identify exactly what it requires. And do you have the ability to provide that same product or service at a competitive advantage or not? Whether it's a better product or service, or because you're providing at a lesser price. And then identify resources in society, people that are like-minded, that they're great grunts, they're ready to work, they're ready to work hard. In exchange, instead of sacrificing capital, you can sacrifice a portion of equity that it sits in a bucket that you can basically allocate as it's earned. And again, you don't need a lot of capital. You just need to find the right people. And if you have the right process, you can slice them a piece of the pie as they earn it. So there are ways to start organizations. I've started 3, ironically, utilizing that model, where I just found great people, identified what their strengths were, and I identified, in this situation, I'm the visionary, but in another situation, I'm the executor. I'm the integrator, if you want to call it that. You know, that's another book, Rocket Fuel, that I highly recommend. But I really do believe that it's taking a lot of concepts that we learn and really applying them. And no two organizations are the same. So because there's as unique as our thumbprint, we have to make sure that we are adapting to our product or service, our market, the type of market share that we want to take on. And then if this is your side gig and you're working 40 hours a week, do you have the willpower, do you have the drive and the commitment to put in those additional 40 to 50 hours? There's going to be a sacrifice, and you have to be cognizant of that. You will sacrifice. Something has to give. And you don't need a lot of capital. I don't want to sound as I'm being difficult, but you can literally take equity and its perceived value or future value and literally give people a piece of the pie in order to give you the services that you need. And I would highly recommend for people to truly think out of the box and try to identify constructive ways to take resources and really bring them into your realm. But again, everything is earned, nothing is given. You should not be giving capital to anyone that hasn't earned anything. Everything should be earned with an executable.
That's really great information. And yes, and you did touch on a point that we will address a little bit later on this panel is debt versus equity. So that was great that you mentioned that. Thank you. So Dr. Kay, we'll proceed with you.
Yes, and one, I wanted to leverage off of something you said, Caesar. One of the things I found that helped is that not all people value things the same. So you can bring people in and their value, what they value may be very different than the next person. So having that discussion, I can remember years ago in my business, I didn't have a lot of money then to give bonuses and extra money and things like that, but I wanted them to take some ownership in the company psychologically, if not else. And so I asked them, what is it that they wanted? What would they think would be added value? And interestingly enough, including somebody who said, I just want to go home at 5 o'clock at night because I have children and I feel obligated to stay because there's so much work to be done. So what we needed was a part-time person to help her. That was more value to her than being given equity or given money or anything else. And so what we did was, by the time I got through, after asking all of the people that were working with me, we were able to find where their value was, what they wanted, what they needed, and be able to work with them. So there's lots of ways to work with that when you don't have a lot of money. There are other ways to make it work. Also, I do want to hit on the nonprofit. I'm trying to pick up on certain things that other people have said so we don't repeat. But on the nonprofit, I've seen an awful lot of people especially a number in our veterans program that have gone in with the idea of being a not-for-profit. I think that there's another approach that we can use, and is you can give back to the people who need it. I know our veterans especially are very concerned about giving back. And so I think that you can find for-profit businesses that will allow you to give back to the people that you care about in a different way. So I know within my own organization, when I had it for years, for example, I was in the financial investment securities business. I was one of the first certified financial planners years ago. And one of the things I did was 25% of my time was spent helping people who could not afford to pay me. And that was the deal I made with my organization, because we were in a profit sharing mode. And I said, okay, 25% of my time, that's what I'll do. To 26%, they would cut me off. So because we had an arrangement that they were all impacted by. So I think that if we could reframe the way we think about how do we do good in this world, if we want to be a nonprofit and make a difference, how can we generate money enough so we can do those things, which is one of the things that I've been balancing in a university setting, the same thing. How do I generate some of my funds in a way that brings profits in through through various different uh, things like camps or various other things we might do, that then I can give back to the students, and then I can give back to the veterans. So not always looking for a handout, but figuring out how you can create some of your revenue, and you have to balance that because of the tax purposes. You have to balance how much of your money you generate through for-profit or for-profit to then be able to give out to other people. But you can either balance it and keep it a not-for-profit, or you can go with the B Corporation, which would allow you to have a for-profit mission, but still be profitable. And I think that that's one of the areas that I think is important to look at, because I've seen many of our veterans who really do, they want to come back and give back. And I think there's an opportunity to balance those two.
Yes, you're absolutely correct, Dr. K. And B Corp stands for Benefit Corporation,
Right.
and it's a bit of a hybrid model. So it kind of incorporates the for-profit and nonprofit models, and
it's
brings them
important to
together.
understand
So,
what the rules are beyond that point with a B Corporation. And the accountant certainly can answer those questions, but it's something that
yes.
I think the days of just having a not-for-profit and donating money is an extremely difficult, especially during this time, but even normally. I think that there can be a way to be fiscally responsible, as well as create a value that's added not only to the people who work with us, which is one of that, and as well as to the people in the community. So I just wanted to say that about the nonprofits. I think you have to have a business model no matter what you do, and just having it, I want to do good, without figuring out how you can generate the revenue to do that is it's heartbreaking for me when I see that with our veterans, because I know they mean well and they want to do the right thing, but there has to be a financial model that goes along with it.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for that. That is absolutely great advice. And so that leads us into the next question, which is, we talk about, oftentimes you hear the term sweat equity. Well, unfortunately, sweat equity doesn't really pay the bills. So what are some alternate funding methods when you're getting started as an entrepreneur?
Should I jump right in? Do I always get to go first?
Please. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Chris.
Wow.
Sure, why not?
What a good deal.
Yes.
Boy, so alternate funding mechanisms. Well, the first thing I want to hit on is probably the biggest misconception I see working with nascent, mostly inexperienced entrepreneurs, though I work with both types, is this huge misconception about financing, right? There's this notion out there that you can get an investor. These investors, everybody laughs. You've heard this one, right? I just need an investor. That's it. And then I'm off and running. Yeah. So about those investors, they invest in businesses. There are investors who invest in businesses. Unfortunately, at least in my neck of the woods in Southeast Florida, I won't speak for any other context like Southern California. Also, this does not apply if you have a past exit, right? So if you had a 9-10 figure exit, this doesn't apply. If you have not, you can't get investors for an idea. You can get investors for a business, but not a business idea. Hey, so I've got this idea, I just need a few $100,000, and I mean, this is it, Yeah, unfortunately, that is not the environment in which we live currently. So you've got to build something on your own, right? So then the question is, so how do you do that? I mentioned the last prompt, funding via revenue. That's, to me, by far, that's the best, right? You've got revenue coming in, your own money. It speaks to Sandy's point as well, which I really couldn't agree with more. I mean, she's absolutely right. It's an issue of sustainability. The nonprofits just have a tendency to be unsustainable unless they've reached, a critical mass like the Red Cross, and they've been around for years. But otherwise, when we have an economic recession, say, you're going to see a lot of nonprofits who rely solely on donations go out of business, and it's very, very sad and unfortunate. Whereas if they have a revenue generating arm, right? Again, back to the question now about funding, if you have that revenue generating, then that's how you can fund your business. And hey, if you do want to do some social good, that's fantastic. You can apply it to that as well. A couple of our alumni are Alex and Andrew, who founded a company, 4Ocean. And as Sandy was talking, I just checked their current stats. They pulled 8.8 million pounds of trash out of the ocean. They're not a nonprofit. And I'd argue they couldn't have done that without a massively successful revenue generating arm. And that's how they funded a lot of their expansion. So I think that would be my main point. And it goes back to the earlier point of, if you can figure out a way to generate some revenue along the way, that's ideal. However, that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to invest in something, you have to build out a technology, and, equity is a great way to get some work done, right? That point's already kind of been made here, but there's some nuances in terms of equity that you really want to think about. You want to make sure that it's vested over a period of time. You want to make sure you have plenty of equity remaining in the pool. You really want to be cautious about managing your cap table. This is something that I find a lot of entrepreneurs tend to be inexperienced with, and it's very troublesome, especially if they do get to the point, right, where they are raising money from investors. Because like I said, you can't get investors for an idea, but you can for a business. So you start growing a business and you want to pour some of that rocket fuel, because the more you spend in marketing, you've got such a great product, the more money you're going to make. That's when investors come in, because they like making money. They say, wait, if you spend $10,000 a month, you make 30. Well, what if we spent $100,000 a month? Would we make 300? Right? Great. Okay, fantastic. But when you get to that stage and when you get to that point, you really got to take care, do some research and get some education around the cap table, where it puts you at a really, really significant disadvantage in terms of not only negotiating with your employees and people that you want to give equity who may have more experience, though probably not. Investors certainly do. They know all about that. Whereas you may be raising money 1, 2, maybe 4 or 5 times in your lifetime, right? Even if you're a serial entrepreneur. Well, they've done this process dozens and dozens of times. So they're at a significant advantage, and that can be detrimental. Not that, they're going to necessarily take advantage of you, but managing your cap table, managing your equity, having a vesting schedule for any equity you give out. The worst thing you can do is just say, man, I really like this gal. I really like this guy. They're a real go-getter. I can't pay you, but I'll give you 10% of this company right now. Just come on board. Well, people have a tendency to kind of lose momentum over time, and people are really good at giving an excellent first impression. And if you do that, it can be problematic because, if you do cut ties and go another route, they still own that. If you don't have a vesting schedule, a clawback clause, these kind of nuances, talk to your attorney about those and make sure it's structured correctly and that you vet them over time and that they're really committed to the organization and they contribute over the long haul to earn that equity, as opposed to just being, hey, you're great, let's do this.
Yeah, thank you. That's really great answer, and we appreciate that insight. I did want to ask Dr. K, did you want to jump in and answer this? Because I think you mentioned you had another commitment.
Oh, yeah. I do in a little bit.
Okay.
I think the other answer is when, the family, friends, and fools comment about the first ones to invest for you. I do think that it's a note to self when you have family and friends that invest in your business. Remember that, especially for family, you're going to have to go to Thanksgiving dinner and you're going to have to face them for a long time. So I think it needs to be clarified as to what you're doing with them and what the risk is for them, so that it's clear and expectations of how it would be paid back. And or if it will be paid back, and if it's a loan, if it's equity, be real clear with them. The other is that the more you get into debt, the more difficult it becomes, because as you get into debt, the issue is that means you have to generate that revenue to pay it back. You can't expect that it'll come in the long run. So I think being very aware of what debt means to you and how that's going to be impact you. I also think that partnerships are difficult. I spent many, many years as an accountant and financial advisor before I went into this to where I am now. And in the 20s, and all my clients were entrepreneurs, business owners. And I will tell you that I saw very, very, very few partnerships survive. It just doesn't work well. So a partnership which has equal partners is difficult. A partnership where you have everything spelled out, maybe with a small percentage of ownership, probably will be easier to deal with in the long run. And you know, partnerships with families are just difficult, and it's something to really consider. If it's a gift, that's one thing, but if it's a loan or a investment in equity, you're going to have to look at these people a long time. Yeah. I also believe that in today's marketplace, probably more than ever, we've got different options for raising money through seed funding, through competitions, there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity that wasn't around when I was starting my business, is now there. So I think we take advantage of those things and look for our students and our veterans have looked for not only the ones that we do in our, for our end of the semester competitions, but also for those that are local as well as around the U.S. So we've had success with our students. I had one that went out to California and won the Young Entrepreneur of the Year award and got some funding and got some help. So there's lots of different options for looking for places where you can pitch for seed funding, where there maybe is no strings attached to it and is just income to you and allows you to get your business on the road. If you're going to take that step to venture capital, you need to be at a level in which the venture capitalists are going to take you seriously. Even the angel investors are looking for you to have done well. The sooner you can generate profits that look good and a structure of your balance sheet that looks good, you have a leverage position, then you can negotiate better. You can't negotiate from weakness. You need to negotiate from strength. So I recommend finding the free money, try to, really manage your family and friends' money, and then you can start to look, and the bankers are still there. Lines of credit is another one that, depending on what you're going to do with a line of credit, if you're going to use that line of credit, in my history, I tell all of my entrepreneurs, you have that line of credit for an emergency. It cannot be something to use for operating capital because you got to pay it back at the end of the year. But if you have an emergency and you need to come up with some money quickly, and then you can repay it with revenue that you're generating, lines of credits are like insurance policies. And I can remember years ago, they broke into my building and I had a line of credit. They stole all my computers, and I was in the tax business. I had a tax business, and it was during tax season. They took all my computers with all my memory. And that was not a pretty event. But because I had a line of credit, I was able to go to the bank and get the funding to repurchase the computers and get myself back in business. I would have lost my business at that point if I hadn't had that. I was able to repay it because I was generating income from my business. But lines of credits are important things to have, but they should only be utilized when you can see that you've got enough money to generate. It's a one-shot deal, and then you can repay it. It's not something that you're going to have to, because the banks expect that when you pay that if they give you money at the beginning of the year, by the end of the year, that thing's paid off. So
Yeah, exactly.
establish credit with the bank by keeping it for 90 days and then giving it back to them. And that helps to establish your credit.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really great point. I mean, banks are in the business too of being banks.
That's right. And if they get their money back and you prove to them with a small amount, you borrowed 5 and you gave it back to them, the next time they're going to be more apt to give it to you. So
exactly right. Establishing that relationship and the trust that
absolutely
you can.
Your banker can be your best friend if you work with them properly.
Right.
That is true. That is very true. Your banker can be one of your best friends. It's part of the three-legged stool. Good banker, good CPA,
Right.
good attorney, right? So
Right.
those are critical.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Shuffman, would you like to answer this question as well?
Sure. It's interesting. Yesterday, I had a conversation with a client student. I'm now on his board, and he was talking about having a C-level employee hire, and he wanted to give him stock. And I said, well, first of all, you don't bring someone on C-level. You want to date first, and you want to go. And because he was going to give equity to this person right off the bat. And I said, no, absolutely not. You can't do that. And this person has had he's had 3 exits from other companies, very successful exit strategies that happened with, wonderful outcomes. But it still doesn't mean that it's going to be a great partnership for you. Second of all is we were talking about lines of credit. I also have a very very inexperienced entrepreneur, and he had opened a company. He did not come to us before he opened, and it was in the wrong place at the wrong price at the wrong time. And he was getting ready to take out a HELOC, a home equity loan. And I said, you will do that, and you will ruin your romantic partnership at home. It will never be the same if you do that. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I have another client who is a very successful manufacturer in Northwest Florida, and he has never taken on equity. He has over 100 employees. And he can take loans, but he bootstrapped absolutely everything. And so obviously now he's in an amazing position, but I think every piece of his business is negotiated. Price is always negotiated. And, but this has enabled him to do debt instead of equity. And so he is 100% owner of this company. He now has the major banks saying, oh, we want to work with you. Of course they do. Mm-hmm. And he's in a really great position. So there are a lot of different ways to look at debt. There are a lot of great ways to look at equity. There was a tech transfer company that I helped to found many, many years ago. And we had employees who were working for us for equity. They were learning things they never would have had the chance to learn. And so it was great for them. And they got a teeny tiny piece of equity, and it made them feel that they were part of something that was bigger than they were. So speaking to what Dr. K was saying, it gave them this incredible feeling of ownership. And for them, it was the right fit. So I totally agree with that too. You need to identify what's important before you start throwing around equity. Maybe equity is really not what's important for the employee or for your stakeholder. And I think looking globally at your company in terms of stakeholders instead of employers, employees, people who were invest, just look at them as stakeholders and identify what is important to all of them. Perhaps a partnership with your business is much more important than equity. So I think that was a really great point that Dr. K made.
Mm-hmm. So. Mr. Rose, do you want to add to that?
Sure. I got to say, most of it's already been covered.
Yes.
I'm in a panel with subject matter experts that obviously have brought up just about everything. I will say I've had some success, and I've mentored about four entrepreneurs over the last, let's say, 2 years, and they all have one thing in common. They want to take on debt rather quickly.
Yeah.
I understand, to each their own. Um, if you have the ability to generate some revenue, which is I believe what Dr. Cox was mentioning, and you can do it that way, you're much better off, because then with a great relationship with a great local bank, if you have a community bank that you can build that one-on-one relationship with, and they get to know your business, and you can get a revolving line of credit where your collateral are your receivables, that always helps a lot. It allows you to really establish a relationship. As soon as you generate revenue, you can demonstrate it over a 6-month window of time. They'll give you an LOC, which is great. That helps. I'm a big believer just really in not so much giving away equity, but giving them the opportunity that if I know that I'm building a software as a service and I need a developer and I can't afford you, and in the open market, you're $50 an hour, I believe you should get $100 an hour worth of equity. And then basically have it where you have the opportunity to buy back your equity, with them having the opportunity to acquire it back if you sell, if you raise funds, so that it becomes amicable, and that everyone is fairly treated fairly. But I've done 2 companies specifically where I have literally said, this is what you would be doing. What is that job worth in the open market? What would you get paid? That way no one's questioning it. And then I provide a 2X on every hour that was delivered. And no one was ever, at least not that they've told me, they haven't been unhappy because we were able to work together. One software as a service company that I own, we've got 15 employees, 10 of which are developers, if you can imagine that. And in that space, they've earned a piece of equity. And some of them, if they exit out, because you do not want to have an absentee owner, if you ever want to raise money, I have the option to acquire it back. Just a lot of innovative ways for you to provide equity to people where they're getting fair market. 2X is what I've found to be the sweet spot. That way you're not giving away anything. You're going to get exactly what you earned, right? And that basically makes it simple, because if you didn't earn it, there's nothing to really argue about. If you didn't put in the time, if you didn't produce anything, what's there to argue about? Nothing was earned. So it's a perceived value on sweat equity and then outcomes. That's been rather successful. And then again, as I think everyone in the panel has said, generate revenue as quickly as possible. Do not let perfection become the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
Create a minimal viable product. Create that MVP, get it out there. Get it out there ASAP so that people can give you feedback, because a business is useless if you can't sell your product or service. Even if you're communicating that you're starting up, and because of that, they get such a great deal, but you want feedback. You want to get that. You want to get out to market immediately.
Right.
Again, perfection is the enemy of the good when you're starting off. Just get to work.
So that's a really good point. And in light of what you're saying about just getting to work, how do you capture what you've done already to be attractive to lending institutions and investors? I mean, you hear a lot about financial projections. Well, how do you capture that to make your business look like it's working?
Are you asking me, or is that the?
Oh, it's open to anyone. I was just trying to get some order earlier, but sure, go ahead.
In my opinion, I believe that if you have the ability to identify a minimal viable product, right, and you can, whether it's in beta, I just think you got to get something out there. Nothing happens until somebody sells something. Somebody in your organization has to be responsible for sales, for business development, whatever you want to call it. But somebody has to be out there selling the product. As soon as you're generating revenue, and you have the ability to do a rinse and repeat lean type of framework, whether it's a product or a service, you're going to be continuously improving. And then as you improve, you're going to minimize your waste, your rework, your inefficiency, the scrap. And as an outcome, you're going to be able to demonstrate that you, to an investor at least, that you have the ability to recognize what your minimum viable product was, your MVP, that you were able to set up a sequence or a life cycle to rinse and repeat. Then when you can demonstrate that discipline, and more importantly, revenue fixes all, an investor, an angel investor could come in and actually feel comfortable that their money is not going to be, it's going to be used wisely. But you have to convince, because the investors nowadays are not the same investors that existed 10 years ago. Now you're not going to get an angel investor from an idea, from just a great business plan. You have to actually demonstrate that your theory is real, that it's just not a pie in the sky, and revenue fixes that. And your ability, your discipline to demonstrate that minimal viable product. What is it? What is it? Did you do it in your window of time, within your budget? How did it go? What are your life cycles? Are you in weekly iterations? What are you doing to demonstrate continuous improvement? You demonstrate discipline, people will give you money, or they'll be interested. How about that?
Mm-hmm. That's fair. Dr. Cox?
Yeah, I think those are a number of great points there. I might even take it a step further when you ask to the specific question of, how do you develop a model that is attractive from an investor's perspective? Most recently, in my experience and conversations with folks at Florida Venture Forum, and again, in specifically my neck of the woods, it's gone even beyond revenue to some extent to recurring revenue. Right? So they want that recurring revenue. If you've got to continuously chase down new patients, I know a company I'm working with right now that's doing fantastic, but they conduct a service for consumers. And once it's done, that's it. They need another consumer, and they're doing a great business. They're making a lot of money, but investors are not really interested in helping them expand, because what do you mean? Once you've got a customer, that's it? Your service works. It works so well that the customer's done with you in 40 days? Then you need new customers. Well, what can we do to keep those customers, right? It's so much, it doesn't matter what your business is, it's always easier to sell to an existing customer, right? As opposed to a new customer. And this company lives on new customers. It's brutal. I see a lot of investors preferring, it makes sense financially. It's really straightforward when you pull out the math, right? Recurring revenue versus non-recurring. The graph goes right up and to the right. When you have that recurring revenue, and then new customers are just gravy right on top, and then they become recurring revenue, the models are completely different financially. And one just really skyrockets, and that's the type of business that investors are looking for. They're not looking for 1x, 2x, 3x. They're looking for 30x. And the way to get there is recurring revenue. It's not new customers all the time. So once you get to a point, I know we're getting kind of down the road, once you get to a point where you have revenue, what can you do? Can you cross-sell? Can you upsell? Can you have a membership? Can you have a subscription? It's no wonder that there's a subscription for everything on the internet. It's because from the business's perspective, it's a fantastic model, right? From my perspective, like, this sock club is only, $19.99 a month of really cool dress socks. These are great. And maybe that's okay. But then, 4 years down the road, I turn around and I'm like, oh man, I spent $1,500 on socks and all my drawers are full of socks. Like, it's not really great from a consumer's perspective always. So keep that in mind as you're looking at your recurring bills. But from a business perspective, that recurring revenue seems to be, they really want that in the model. Because it makes everything, Sandy talked about, rainy day funds or these emergency things, so that financially everything's so much more predictable when you have recurring revenue and you have members, or you have subscription, or you have something that keeps rolling over. And then one other point that I just want to make sure we make for this group specifically in terms of the financing, and so sorry, you mentioned this in terms of, funding via receivables. It's fantastic. In the veterans program, I've had a lot of companies that pursue government contracting. I'm sure you all have as well, right? Because we have the benefits of some of those set-asides, and you can realistically go after some of these very lucrative contracts. And it's really to the last question, in terms of funding via receivables, you can use a factor, and you can also do purchase order financing. So I just want to mention, purchase order financing, that's as good as gold, particularly if your customer is the US government or Walmart or Amazon or whomever, big company with awesome credit, and they say, hey, if you can produce X, we'll give you this amount of money. You can take that to a factor, and you can make that happen. So that's easy. It goes to your receivables point, and it's just something that's worth mentioning to this group, particularly because some of them do qualify for those service disabled veteran set-asides or the minority-owned business set-asides, and they can be really lucrative.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, that is absolutely the truth. So definitely look into all those programs, and we have a lot of information of that about those programs, certification programs on our website as well. So Ms. Sheffman, would you like to contribute to, do you have any ideas about how to make your business attractive?
Well, I think customer acquisition costs being as high as they are, it is significant what Dr. Cox and Mr. Ruiz stated. You've got to keep those customers. And so if you have a great initial idea, you've got to go on and have an add-on. There's another company that's come through the MVRC Veterans Florida program, and they are classic razor and blades. They've created a product that's significant to buy, but really the margin is going to be on the blades. And so I think you need to understand what your model is. Something as old-fashioned as the Gillette razor and blades model is still a very efficient, very effective, financially lucrative, Another point, in fact, I had this mentioned when I was pitching one of our students who won our local pitch competition. I was pitching one of his products to an investor, and then also for a sales distribution channel. The first question was, how many times on the cost? And I said, well, he's priced at 4 times his cost. And he said, okay, fine. But if I had said 2 times, it would have been, no, we're out. And this was a 5-digit, this was an expensive product. And I think there was the margin of error, there are the research costs associated, there are the sales channel costs that are associated, and you've got to price your product appropriately. And that affects the investment that you get, the financing you get. If your product has margins that are way too small, it's going to affect your company, it's going to affect the investment that you get. And trying to reprice later is not impossible, but it's very difficult because you're training your customers to what an acceptable cost is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little off topic, but I think it does affect any type of investment in your company, whether it's from a commercial bank, from a private lender, an angel.
I think that's a really important point. And a lot of, again, the inexperienced entrepreneurs I work with have a general tendency to underprice and not, attribute enough value to what they've created for some reason. I don't know if it's kind of like Walmart's brainwashed everybody, right? Low price. You got to have the lowest price. Like have the best product, have the best service, and then charge accordingly. That can work out much, much better. Not to mention just all the worries that you hit on about underpricing. Then how do you discount? Then what happens when a shipment gets lost? Then you don't have any buffer. It's just brutal. So yeah, that's a really great point. I think important one.
I think we've all read about companies that have decided not to work with Walmart because they squeeze the margins so dramatically that there's very little money to be made. And there are all sorts of different pricing strategies, direct to consumer, which, can be less expensive, but not always, because you've got those huge marketing customer acquisition costs associated with it. But pricing strategy is huge. It's really huge.
It is important. I think also a lot of people should really look at whether they're going B2B or B2C,
Mhm.
because again, your customer acquisition cost will be greater, and it's going to pivot if you're on a B2C model, right? So I think it's very important for the entrepreneur to really just try to digest and understand who their true customer is going to be. And the subscription models, you're right on everything, whether it's a product or a service, they seem to be everywhere. So thinking out of the box like that has also been very, very good. You know, I hope that all the veterans take the opportunity to take their business and really look at it slightly different after they see our discussion, simply because there's a lot of tidbits that they should be able to pull back and ask themselves a lot of the why questions, or am I doing this? Or, you know, there's a lot of pitfalls in business. Unfortunately, if everyone was really successful, then we wouldn't be here, right? There's a lot of pitfalls, but I really do think that this group has really given a lot of great feedback. I'm actually enjoying this, by the way. This has been a great discussion.
Yeah, that's the whole goal, right? If it doesn't feel like work, then you're doing something right when you
Yeah.
go to your job every day. So I agree with you. This has been really phenomenal. And I can't thank you all enough for sharing your expertise and insight and your time with us and our audience. Are there any final comments that any of you would like to make?
I'm so excited that you've introduced me to these wonderful people across the state of Florida, Dr. Cox, Mr. Ruiz, Dr. K. I never would have had the opportunity to meet you guys and to hear your wisdom. So thank you very much. Thank you, Amy.
Oh,
Thank you
you're
for
welcome.
putting it
It's my
together.
pleasure. And yeah, we're so fortunate. So thank you all again for your time and sharing your insights. And we'll see you soon. So thank you again.